They assumed we'd lose carriers faster than we could build them. Yet by war's end, the United States had commissioned 105 aircraft carriers of all types, including 64 escort carriers. Japanese naval planners could scarcely fathom such industrial output. In Tokyo interrogations after the war, Admiral Ozawa admitted his carrier strategy had failed amid unanticipated volume and speed of U.S. production. Between November 1942 and July 1944, the Kaiser shipbuilding yard turned out 50 Casablanca-class escort carriers, laying, launching and commissioning them in under 20 months. These modest jeep carriers became the backbone of U.S. amphibious support, convoy defense, and flexible strike operations. Japanese admirals had counted on attrition to bleed U.S. naval strength. Instead, as one Japanese officer later confessed, they built more faster than we could sink. By the mid-1940s, Japan's once formidable carrier fleet lay in ruins, while U.S. carrier strength multiplied fivefold. Imagine the shock in Imperial Navy headquarters, their elite carriers, once the pride of their fleet, drowning under waves of U.S. mass production. Their doctrine presumed technological edge and limited enemy industrial reach, but the U.S. shattered those assumptions. In that cruel twist of logistics, American shipyards became weapons of war, turning steel and labor into an unstoppable oceanic arsenal. How did U.S. strategy, planning and innovation allow this astonishing reversal? What miscalculations did Japanese admirals commit, and how did they adapt, if at all, as America's carrier fleet surged past them? In 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy stood at the height of its confidence. Its carrier arm, the Kido Butai, was the most experienced and lethal naval aviation force on Earth. Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's staff believed that a short, decisive war could cripple the United States before its immense industry could react. According to intercepted Japanese naval communications preserved in the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence files, planners estimated American shipbuilding capacity at no more than 10 large warships per year, a figure that vastly understated reality. The confidence was earned through early victories. At Pearl Harbor, 6 Japanese carriers launched 353 aircraft that sank or crippled 8 U.S. battleships in minutes. At the same time, operations in the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies crushed Allied forces. By mid-1942, Japan controlled an empire stretching over 4 million square miles. Naval intelligence reports captured after the war show Tokyo believed American morale had been permanently broken. Japanese naval doctrine, rooted in the decisive battle theory of Mahan and Togo, assumed a climactic fleet engagement would determine victory. Carriers were the spearhead, but battleships remained the sacred core. Japan's Naval General Staff ignored intelligence from attaché officers, warning that U.S. production was expanding beyond all forecasts. In his diary, Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi boasted, "Our pilots and ships are superior. The enemy builds with money, not spirit." Through late 1942, Japan's command continued to underestimate America's ability to replace losses. Even after Midway, where 4 fleet carriers were destroyed, Admiral Nagumo reported to the Imperial headquarters that replacement construction will proceed as planned, believing Japan could recover within 2 years. No one in Tokyo grasped that the United States had already authorized 33 Essex-Class carriers and dozens of escort types, with industrial capacity to launch more each month than Japan could launch in a year. The enemy's overconfidence, anchored in honor, experience and underestimation, set the stage for strategic disaster. While Tokyo celebrated its recorded dominance, declassified American documents reveal shipyards from California to Newport News already roaring with round-the-clock work that would soon drown those victories in steel and smoke. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, its Navy faced what official records called a staggering numerical and tactical imbalance. The U.S. Naval History and Heritage Command lists only 7 fleet carriers in commission: Lexington, Saratoga, Ranger, Yorktown, Enterprise, Wasp, and Hornet against Japan's 10. Most American ships were slower, their air groups smaller, their torpedoes unreliable. The U.S. Bureau of Ships reported chronic shortages of armor plate, turbines, and aviation fuel tanks in early 1942. Morale reflected the imbalance. Newspapers predicted a defensive war lasting years. A February 1942 Gallup poll found 62% of Americans feared Japan might reach Hawaii again. Even Britain doubted U.S. readiness. Winston Churchill warned Roosevelt that the Pacific Fleet was gravely underbalanced in carriers. The logistical barriers were immense. America's coastal yards were still converting from peacetime tonnage. At the Norfolk Navy Yard, planners estimated 1 new carrier every 24 months, hopeless under wartime attrition. Manpower was another hurdle. The War Production Board recorded that fewer than 400,000 skilled shipyard workers existed nationwide in 1941. By 1943, that number had to triple. American pilots and commanders also lacked combat experience. In contrast to Japan's battle-hardened naval aviators, U.S. carrier squadrons trained on outdated biplanes until months before Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander John S. Thatch later admitted, "We were learning as we fought, and at times we learned the hard way." Yet beneath this adversity lay the foundation of an underdog resurgence. The same industrial base that built America's cars, locomotives, and skyscrapers was awakening. Henry J. Kaiser's yards in Oregon and California began hiring thousands per week. The Maritime Commission's emergency shipbuilding program quietly redirected its assembly line philosophy toward combat vessels. By early 1943, what once seemed impossible, matching and surpassing Japan's carrier force, was no longer theory but scheduled reality. The nation still bled, but steel tonnage and manpower graphs in Washington already pointed skyward. The world's most underestimated fleet was preparing to prove its worth. Behind the headlines of defeat, an extraordinary transformation was already underway. In January 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9024, creating the War Production Board, which centralized industrial planning and gave shipbuilding unprecedented priority. Declassified Bureau of Ships. Memoranda show how naval architects and industrialists secretly met in Washington that spring to design what would become the Essex-Class carrier, standardized for mass production with interchangeable components, modular hull sections, and simplified machinery layouts. This modular design was revolutionary. Each Essex-class carrier used prefabricated hull units assembled simultaneously in different yards, then joined in dry dock like a jigsaw puzzle. According to the Naval Engineering Journal, 1946, this process cut build time from the pre-war average of 36 months to just 15 months. Henry J. Kaiser, already famous for Liberty ships, applied his continuous flow production model to naval auxiliaries and escort carriers. In his words, "We build ships like Detroit builds cars." The innovation extended beyond steel. Classified correspondence between Admiral Ernest J. King and the Chief of Naval Operations in mid-1942 reveals the birth of the Two-Ocean Navy Plan, allocating resources for 18 fleet carriers, 9 light carriers, and 50 escort carriers within 2 years. To achieve this, the Navy partnered with major corporations, Bethlehem Steel, Newport News, Puget Sound, and Kaiser's Yards, forming what wartime economists called the greatest single industrial mobilization in history. Technical ingenuity fueled the surge. Pratt & Whitney supplied standardized aircraft engines. Westinghouse built modular catapult systems, and new hydraulic arresting gear reduced landing accidents by 40%. Engineers from MIT and the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics developed armored flight decks, radar-directed landing aids, and more efficient hangar layouts. Every improvement was documented, tested, and replicated across multiple shipyards within weeks. a logistical ballet of engineering precision. Meanwhile, secrecy cloaked the operation. A 1943 Navy Department memo instructed public information officers to release nothing on carrier tonnage, production rate or yard progress. Even Japanese intelligence, relying on aerial reconnaissance, consistently underestimated U.S. shipbuilding speed by a factor of 3. When captured after the war, Vice Admiral Fukudome admitted, "We believed new carriers required 2 years at least. Your factories built them in 1." By late 1943, American innovation had turned shipbuilding itself into a weapon. Assembly lines, design standardization, and inter-yard coordination transformed naval construction from craftsmanship into industry. The secret wasn't merely technology. It was a mindset, efficiency as warfare. By early 1944, the full weight of American industrial momentum was bearing down on the Pacific. Naval logs from the Bureau of Ships show a steady rhythm. New carriers launching almost monthly from yards at Newport News, Brooklyn, San Francisco, and Puget Sound. The Navy's official progress report on fleet expansion, dated February 1, 1944, records 17 Essex-Class fleet carriers either commissioned or on sea trials. American planners used this production tempo to time their offensives with mathematical precision. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz's staff drew up Operation Granite, later revised into the Central Pacific Drive, ensuring that each successive island assault coincided with the arrival of newly commissioned carriers. At the same time, Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance's intelligence officers reviewed decrypted Japanese naval dispatches showing that the enemy believed U.S. naval strength in early 1944 to be no more than 6 operational carriers. In reality, 12 were already operating in the Pacific, with 6 more fitting out. The stage was set for a logistical ambush. Fuel convoys steamed from Pearl Harbor to forward anchorages. Floating dry docks, hospital ships and aviation tenders followed close behind. Naval weather records confirm favorable trade winds for carrier flight operations across the Marshall Islands through February and March 1944, influencing the timing of Operation Flintlock, the assault on Kwajalein and Roy Namur. While American task forces formed in silence, Japanese reconnaissance pilots scoured empty sea lanes. Their outdated search patterns, still based on 1942 operational radii, missed entire U.S. groups assembling behind weather fronts. Admiral Koga's own diary notes, "No sighting reports for 10 days. Enemy likely refitting in Hawaii." Instead, Nimitz's carrier groups were already within striking distance. Each Essex-class ship carried 90 planes, double the complement of most Japanese carriers. Combined Task Force 58 moved with clockwork precision. Every destroyer, oiler, and support ship logged and synchronized by fleet radio schedules, verified in contemporary 5th Fleet Operation Orders 44-2. On the eve of invasion, U.S. crews stood at battle stations under red light, engines turning over in unison. The enemy believed America was rebuilding. The truth, confirmed in classified fleet logs, was that America was already there, poised to strike with more carriers than Japan could comprehend. At dawn on June 19, 1944, in the western Pacific skies over the Philippine Sea, the Japanese Navy launched what it believed would be its decisive counterblow. The Operation A-Go was meant to halt America's carrier advance once and for all. According to the Imperial Navy's own battle orders, intercepted by U.S. intelligence 2 days prior, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded 9 carriers with roughly 430 aircraft, while Task Force 58 under Admiral Raymond Spruance brought 15 carriers and over 900 planes into the fight. At 10:10 a.m., Japanese radar operators aboard Taiho detected approaching contacts and assumed they had found the main U.S. fleet. But American signals intercept teams aboard. USS Enterprise were already tracking Japanese radio chatter in real time. "Enemy air strength appears concentrated and exposed," read the log of Commander Joseph Rochefort, who relayed decrypted frequencies directly to Spruance's flagship. When Japan's first wave of 68 bombers and 16 fighters broke through the clouds, they encountered a sky bristling with Grumman Hellcats. Within minutes, the outcome was sealed. Pilots from USS Lexington and USS Cowpens recorded 42 kills in a single engagement. Lieutenant Alexander Vraciu downed 6 dive bombers in 8 minutes. The official after-action report of Task Group 58.2 notes that only a handful of attackers reached bomb release range. Below, American radar-directed anti-aircraft guns filled the air with timed explosions, shredding incoming formations. Meanwhile, Carrier Taiho, Japan's newest pride, suffered a fatal internal explosion after an American torpedo ruptured aviation fuel tanks. Hours later, Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, met the same fate from submarine USS Kavala. In a single day, Japan lost 3 carriers, 350 planes, and nearly 480 veteran pilots. U.S. losses totaled 123 aircraft and 76 airmen, figures confirmed in the U.S. Naval Aviation Combat Summary for June. 1944 eyewitnesses described the spectacle as turkey shooting. The phrase, immortalized in post-battle press briefings, came from Lieutenant Commander Robert Johnson, who said, "They came in waves, and we just knocked them down." The Japanese, stunned by radar coordination and disciplined formations, realized their carrier air arm had been annihilated. By nightfall, Ozawa's fleet limped westward under radio silence. American search planes shadowed the retreat, confirming wreckage spread across 200 miles of sea. Rear Admiral Mitch's simple entry in his war diary captured the turning point. Enemy carrier aviation finished as an effective force. Strategically, the Battle of the Philippine Sea marked the moment Japanese naval power collapsed beyond recovery. The U.S. could replace every aircraft lost within days. Japan never recovered its pilots. Declassified Japanese staff minutes reveal an admission few dared to voice aloud. Industrial strength is the final weapon. The battle's thunder faded with the setting sun, but its echo carried across Tokyo's corridors of power. America's carriers, once doubted, derided, and dismissed, now ruled the Pacific, products of a nation that built faster than its enemies could destroy. In the aftermath of the Philippine Sea, intercepted Japanese naval communique painted a portrait of disbelief. "Our air fleet has ceased to exist as a fighting unit," read a decrypted message from Admiral Toyoda to Tokyo on June 21, 1944, now preserved in the magic intelligence summaries. The vaunted carrier arm, the pride of the Imperial Navy, was gone. Intelligence reports recorded the destruction of 3 carriers and over 350 aircraft within 48 hours. Rear Admiral Fukudome's captured diary described it bluntly. "We misjudged the enemy's factories. Their shipyards are faster than our courage." Inside Japan's naval general staff, the reaction bordered on despair. Surviving pilots who returned to Guam found their airfields cratered and supply lines shattered. Maintenance crews lacked spare parts. Fuel convoys had been annihilated by U.S. submarines, prowling the South China Sea. A July 1944 report from the Combined Fleet Operations Bureau warned that further offensive operations by carrier aviation are impossible within the year. The statement effectively ended Japan's offensive naval strategy. Prisoner interrogations conducted aboard USS Bunker Hill revealed stunned disbelief among captured aviators. One officer confessed that Tokyo's intelligence estimated America possessed 10 carriers at most, never imagining over 20 fleet and light carriers already operating. The U.S. Navy's Combat Intelligence Bulletin No. 98 noted that such ignorance illustrates the total failure of Japanese reconnaissance. The psychological collapse was swift. Radio Tokyo broadcast euphemisms about temporary setbacks, but morale plummeted. Letters recovered from dead pilots over the Marianas expressed fatalism. "The sky belongs to the enemy. We fight knowing it is the end." Even Emperor Hirohito's liaison, Marquis Kido, recorded in his journal that our Navy's strength has melted away like snow. Strategically, Japan's surviving ships retreated to the inland sea, conserving dwindling fuel. By autumn 1944, the once dominant Kido Butai existed only on paper. Declassified U.S. fleet intelligence summarized it best. The enemy fleet is intact in hulls but empty of men, planes, and hope. The shock was complete. What Yamamoto once called the one decisive battle had been fought and lost, not merely on the waves, but in the factories that never slept. The immediate consequences of the Philippine Sea reverberated through every level of the Pacific. War. U.S. Naval Intelligence summarized it in Fleet Intelligence Bulletin. NUP-105. Enemy carrier air power is no longer a factor of strategic consequence. Within days, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz authorized Operation Forager, the invasion of Saipan, signaling that America now held uncontested command of the Pacific skies. For Japan, the defeat tore the heart from its military strategy. The Combined Fleet Operational Diary recorded that only 35 carrier aircraft remained serviceable in the Marianas sector by July 1st, while the United States deployed more than 1,500 carrier-borne planes. Logistics reports from the Japanese Naval Ministry admitted catastrophic fuel shortages, so severe that training flights were reduced to 15 minutes per day. The psychological and political shock in Tokyo was immediate. Emperor Hirohito was briefed that our Navy has expended its life force. Prime Minister Tojo's cabinet fell 3 weeks later, a collapse accelerated by the public realization that the outer perimeter defense had failed. In his interrogation after the war, Admiral Toyoda acknowledged that the loss of Saipan meant the loss of the Empire's shield. For the Allies, victory opened the gateway to Japan itself. Newly commissioned Essex-Class carriers such as Ticonderoga, Bunker Hill and Bennington joined the fleet in rapid succession, ensuring that by August 1944, the United States could project air power over every remaining Japanese stronghold. The Bureau of Ships' monthly report documented the completion of one new carrier every 29 days, a figure that astonished foreign observers. Media coverage reflected national pride. The New York Times headlined, "Sea Power Now American Weapon Beyond Challenge," while Life magazine published photographs of shipyard workers under the caption, "They build faster than war can break them." Public morale soared. War bond sales spiked 18% following the headlines. Strategically, the battle's aftermath transformed Allied planning. The concept of the Fast Carrier Task Force became the Navy's principal offensive instrument, paving the way for the Leyte Gulf and Okinawa operations. As Admiral Ernest J. King wrote in his post-war report, "Industrial capacity is the supreme element of sea power. The war at sea was decided in the yards before it was fought on the waves. The Battle of the Philippine Sea and the astonishing American shipbuilding surge it symbolized reshaped naval warfare for generations." Military historians regard it as the moment industrial power and technological standardization permanently eclipsed traditional notions of fleet prestige. The U.S. Naval War College Review later concluded, "The Essex-Class carrier, not the battleship, became the new measure of national strength." Academically, the episode is studied as a textbook case of industrialized warfare. Professor Samuel Eliot Morrison's History of United States Naval Operations in World War II notes that between 1942 and 1945, American shipyards produced more tonnage than all Axis navies combined, an output ratio of nearly 8-to-1. The Japanese Naval High Command had anticipated no more than 4 replacement carriers per year. The United States averaged 1 per month. This disparity validated the thesis, later formalized in U.S. military doctrine, that logistics determines strategy. The shock experienced by Japanese admirals reverberated through their post-war writings. Admiral Ozawa's 1949 memoir laments, "Our courage was unmatched, yet courage could not compete with machinery and time. His acknowledgement reflected a cultural reckoning within Japan's military establishment, which had undervalued engineering and industrial science. Japanese naval historian Masanori Ito summarized the lesson succinctly. "We lost to production, not to tactics." For the United States, the legacy was transformative. The wartime two-ocean navy concept evolved into a permanent global carrier presence, sustained through the Cold War and beyond. Strategic studies at the Naval Postgraduate School trace this continuity directly from wartime standardization. The interchangeable hulls, modular construction, and maintenance protocols pioneered in 1943 became the template for future supercarriers. The broader geopolitical significance was equally profound. By demonstrating that industrial capacity could replace battlefield losses almost instantly, the US redefined deterrence. The Soviet Union, analyzing declassified American war production data in the 1950s, modeled its own shipbuilding mobilization programs accordingly. Meanwhile, Japan's defeat catalyzed its post-war economic reconstruction, redirecting its talent for precision manufacturing into civilian industry, an unintended consequence of wartime failure. Today, naval academies cite the carrier boom as proof that innovation and organization can overcome initial weakness. The lesson endures in every naval strategy course. Strength lies not solely in fleets afloat, but in the factories, workers, and planners who sustain them. The Essex-Class legacy, built on sweat, science, and relentless production, became both a monument and a warning. Industrial mastery wins wars long before the first shot is fired. By the final months of 1945, the United States Navy commanded the greatest carrier fleet in history, over 100 vessels spanning oceans from Okinawa to the English Channel. Each ship embodied the fusion of ingenuity, organization, and industrial resolve that had confounded Japanese admirals only 2 years earlier. The Bureau of Ships War Summary concluded, "Shipyards won the Pacific as surely as fleets did." The story of those steel giants is more than a record of production statistics. It is the chronicle of a nation that refused to yield. In the ashes of Pearl Harbor, Americans found not despair, but determination, converting civilian factories into engines of victory. Every rivet driven in San Diego or Newport News echoed across the Pacific, where sailors fought with the knowledge that behind them stood an industrial army of millions. For Japan, the realization came too late. In post-war interrogations, Admiral Fukudome admitted, "Our mistake was believing a nation of merchants could not be a nation of warriors." That single misjudgment doomed the empire's naval dreams. America had proven that in modern war, courage must be matched by capacity, and that speed of replacement can be deadlier than any weapon. The legacy of this triumph endures. Modern supercarriers, nuclear-powered successors of the Essex Line, still embody the principle forged in those frantic years, the ability to build faster than the enemy can destroy. It is a lesson as strategic as it is moral, a reminder that collective will, organization, and belief in purpose can outlast any crisis. As historians, citizens, and storytellers, we revisit this chapter not only to marvel at numbers, but to remember what they represent. The moment industrial democracy defeated militaristic arrogance. The Pacific was won not by chance, but by conviction measured in steel, sweat, and endless American nights under floodlit shipyard cranes.